Canada has
Here we go. What the war in Iran means for Canada.
changed this position
I make that change.
on the Iran war 4 times in 10 days. Day 1.
Canada supports the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace.
Day 4.
These actions are inconsistent with international law.
Day 5.
One can never categorically rule out participation. We will stand by our allies.
Day
I mean, like that one just makes sense. Like, if Turkey, who's a part of NATO, ended up getting hit by rockets, I could very easily see Canada getting drawn into the war, because that would be a NATO response. And so, like, I don't think that's separate from what he was saying.
10.
Le Canada ne participe pas dans les opérations offensives des États-Unis.
Like, none of them are really a chain. Let's hear them all again from the beginning.
Canada has changed this position on the Iran war 4 times in 10 days. Day 1.
Canada supports the United States.
Like, supports the United States in preventing the Iran regime from getting a nuclear weapon. You can support them without participating in the war itself. Like, you can support their decision without participating.
Acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon
I agree.
and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace.
Day 4.
These actions are inconsistent with international law.
Like, I mean, like, some of the things Trump said, there was a lot of what was it? We will, like, remove the Iranian culture or something. They like the Iranian society. Like, verbally, there was definitely some things that were not consistent with international law.
Day 5.
To be noted that they haven't done. Like, Trump talks a lot about breaking the international law, but he hasn't just targeted oil infrastructure or energy yet.
One can never categorically rule out participation.
Absolutely, we can't. Like, I mean, again, they strike NATO. NATO is a defensive alliance. We could be drawn into the war. Now, I haven't heard anything about them targeting. The only NATO country there is Turkey. That's kind of like in their range. And I think they shot down a couple rockets that were heading to Turkey, but I haven't heard about anything hitting Turkey itself.
We will stand by our allies.
Day 10.
Le Canada ne participe pas dans les opérations offensives des États-Unis et ne y participe jamais.
I mean,
So-
like the never say never. Right? Like, you don't know how things are gonna change. I largely, I mean, honestly, like, I kind of follow what he says. Like, support the US. I don't see us getting drawn in unless NATO itself is attacked by Iran, and I think that their capacity to do that has largely been diminished. But I don't see how any of those are actually a change in position. Like, if anything, I think we should be trying to help more. I mean, I don't exactly know what we could provide in this situation. Like, we don't have military assets there. We're giving money to Ukraine. That's kind of the conflict we're focused on. What was it? Like, another 250 million in aid was just confirmed for Ukraine.
Which is it? While the headlines focused on the contradictions, we wanted to figure out why this was so hard to answer. And as it turns out, Canada has a genuinely complicated relationship with this war. And it quietly connects to our gas bill, our mortgage rates, and our military credibility, not to mention a community of over 500,000 Canadians. And above all, what kind of country we actually want to be. So let's get into it.
This sounds interesting.
On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched joint military strikes on Iran. They targeted military infrastructure, air defense systems, and killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei.
Oh, so this isn't the 12-day war. The official start of open hostilities where they took out the Supreme
in the first
Leader.
24 hours.
And maybe the second Supreme Leader. I mean, have we still not seen anything from him? Like, they were saying he was severely injured last time I heard.
10 days later,
But they were saying he was fine first, and then he's like, oh no, he's not showing up because he's hurt. Well, like, if he's only talking to people through messages and letters, like, that's not proof of life.
the bombs were still falling, and Iran just named the Khamenei's son as the new Supreme Leader. Israel's military has publicly promised to eliminate him. Trump says that he won't last long without American approval. Iran's foreign minister has rejected any ceasefire. Iran's response has been
There's still... I hear reports that the Iranian regime has fractured. Can you give me more information about this? Why can they not send a negotiator? We gotta keep watching.
to wage a regional war, firing over 500 ballistic missiles and nearly 2,000 drones at Gulf states and US military bases, and targeting the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply moves every.
The fertilizer was another thing that I was going to talk about, because without making big headlines, the food system is slower because plant, grow, and then harvest your crops, and eat your crops, storage of crops, and so it's a very slow system, and slowly it is coming under extreme strain because of this lack of fertilizer. Here in Canada, we don't see as much of it, from my understanding. But places like India, this is going to be a huge problem, because this is 1/3 of global fertilizer, but it's the majority of the fertilizer they get that is being impacted. Here's a clear, fact-based picture of what fractured means in the context of Iran right now, and why that affects negotiations, and why Tehran hasn't simply sent a negotiator to conclude talks with Washington. Is the Iranian regime actually fractured? There are different interpretations of this claim. External narrative frame Iran's leadership as fractured or in collapse due to economic pressures, military setbacks, and internal disagreement. Some U.S. politicians and commentators argue elite divisions are so deep that negotiation positions aren't unified. Independent reports and analysts generally do not find evidence of a full collapse of control. They note that Tehran's leadership, while under strain, still maintains institutional authority and decision-making coherence. So they're saying that they still have decision-making coherence, the regime. Okay. Inside Iran's politics, there are real elite disputes and public disagreements. Example between more pragmatic officials and hardliners tied to the Islamic Republican Guard Corps, IRGC. These tensions affect policy debates, including diplomacy. The bottom line, the regime isn't literally shattered. It is strained and showing public factionism, and contradictions, but it still retains central control, especially under hardline facts. What's behind this fragmentation or several factors explain why Iran isn't speaking with one clear negotiating voice. Hardliners versus pragmatists. Iran political system includes multiple power centers. The hardliners include IRGC leaders want to resist concession and avoid appearing weak. More pragmatic politicians may see negotiations as a way to ease sanctions and economic pain. These groups often publicly contradict each other. Oh, so kind of like how you look at the U.S. House of Representatives and you get different opinions from different sides. They're quite divided right now. Institutional shifts, but they do appear, from what I understand, to have decision-making coherence. Institutional shifts and power grabs. The IRGC and security elites have gained influence, particularly during wartime, reducing the authority of civilian diplomats. Delegation credibility. Reports from analysts note that even when Iran did send representatives, for example, the first rounds of talk in Islamabad, other elements within the regime did not back their positions, sometimes rejecting or overruling them afterwards. War dynamics and leverage. Iran may believe it holds strategic leverage, control over Strait of Hormuz, and doesn't need to rush into negotiations. Tehran official rhetoric often portrays negotiations as low priority or tactical, not existential. So, from my understanding, the U.S. believes the same thing, that their blockade is having significant effects and that the time pressure is on Iran. And Iran seems to believe that they do not need to rush and that blocking the Strait of Hormuz has put the time pressure on the US. And so I think we're in a situation where both sides are just happy to wait and play it out and see where the time pressure really is. So why has Iran not sent a negotiator or delivered a clear negotiating position? Lack of unified authority, internal vetting and veto power, political signaling, domestic pressures. What this means for diplomacy. Because of these internal dynamics, the regime message about negotiations are often inconsistent. Officials may attend primary talks or send drafts without a formal, empowered negotiating mandate. Hardliners may block or delay any official return to negotiations, concede leverage, or appeal weak. This is why Tehran has not simply sent a negotiator with clear authority or concluded a deal, even if some elements within the regime personally want to negotiate. Caveats and context. Fracture in media/political discourse is often rhetorical and strategic rather than a literal description of regime collapse. Iran still maintains functioning executive, military, and diplomatic institutions, even if they disagree. Public disagreements don't necessarily mean the regime will break apart. They can also be tools of internal bargaining or strategics. It's basically hardliners versus pragmatists, and we would prefer it if the pragmatists were the winners. Problem. Oh, yeah, I wanted to ask about With so much of the world's fertilizer not coming to market through the Strait of Hormuz, how does this affect Canada? How much fertilizer does Canada get through the Strait of Hormuz? Now, I'm going to assume this is going to be little to none, but just like we get no oil through the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think any of that comes to Canada, or very little. The fact is, oil prices in Canada have gone way up because we purchase from a global market. Fertilizer is the same. We purchase fertilizer on a global market, even if the fertilizer that's being cut down on does not come to Canada. It then means places like India will be bidding to purchase the fertilizer that we do get. So the price of fertilizer will, and that means the price of food will go. And this isn't something you see now. This is something you see like 10 months to a year because of the growing delay that's in the system. All right, here's a clear Canada-focused picture on how the disruption of fertilizer flows through the Strait of Hormuz affects Canada agriculture and markets, and importantly, what portion of Canada's fertilizer actually comes through that route. Here we go. Why the Strait of Hormuz matters for fertilizer. The Strait of Hormuz is a critical maritime choke point linking the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Before recent disruption, a large share of global fertilizer exports, especially nitrogen-based fertilizers like urea and ammonia, originated in the Gulf region and transited the strait. Estimates suggest roughly 35 to 45% of global urea export and sizable shares of sulfur used in phosphates and ammonia trade normally move through Hormuz. Because many fertilizer plants depend, like, most people don't realize how dependent our agricultural system is on fertilizer for its output. Like, the reason there's so many people on planet Earth is because of how much output we're able to get off specific land. And fertilizer is a very important aspect. And having that be cut down by 30 to 45%, like, people will starve if this continues. Not now, but eventually. And that is something we should be trying to avoid. And I have no idea how to do that when both the US and Iran appear to be in a wait and see mentality. Okay, because many fertilizer plants depend on Gulf feedstocks and exports, blockages or risk-driven shutdowns in the strait tighten global supply and push up prices. Even though this is not about Canada's direct shipping through Hormuz, global market prices and available supply are interconnected, so disruptions anywhere can affect Canada. Canada's fertilizer imports and how Hormuz disruptions affect them. Canada's fertilizer import picture. According to recent trades and industrial data, Canada imports roughly 4.1 million tons of fertilizer per year. These imports include, okay, I'm not going to read them all, but I remember urea was one of the ones coming through the strait. Canada does not produce phosphate domestically, so virtually all phosphate fertilizer depends on imports. Phosphate, this one. And this is another one that a sizable share of sulfur used in phosphates that goes through the strait. While Canada produces nitrogen and potash domestically, market logistic means some nitrogen imports still flow from US ports and historically from the Middle East. That's the thing, right? With Canada being so large, with how cheap they've created shipping, sometimes it's just easier to put oil from the Middle East on a ship and bring it over than it is to try and ship oil from one side of the country to the other. Because, you know, shipping's cheap. I've been able to do that. Waterways, that's how we've traded for a long time. It's the cheap way of doing stuff. You see the size of those tankers, like. But the same thing goes with like with fertilizer. Sometimes it's cheaper just to bring the fertilizer over from the Middle East than it is to try and ship it all the way across the country. So how much comes via the Strait of Hormuz? Canada doesn't typically import fertilizer directly from the Middle East via Hormuz. Canadian imports mainly land through US and Atlantic ports. Okay. So we get most of ours from the US and Atlantic ports. However, global fertilizer markets are tightly integrated, just like oil markets, right? When exports from the Gulf region are constrained because Hormuz traffic is restricted, global supply tightens and world prices rise, and that indirectly affects Canada's import cost and availability. So the answer is essentially Canada itself doesn't literally have fertilizer ships coming in through the Strait of Hormuz, but global fertilizer flows that would have passed through the strait supply markets that Canada participates in, and therefore influences Canada's fertilizer price and availability. This is because fertilizer, especially nitrogen and phosphate fertilizers, are traded on global markets, and disruptions anywhere, including Hormuz, compress supply and push prices up that all importers, including Canada, must pay. So just like with oil, despite Canada not getting our fertilizer through the strait, we're seeing a 1/3 contraction in the amount of fertilizer produced globally, which is going to raise fertilizer. And I think it's probably going to rise a lot. Oh. Fertilizer prices. Ooh, urea. This is the one we were looking at. Price chart. I like this trading economic. Hey, it plummeted. One year. Let's go 5 years. Whoa, what was happening back there? Is that? Yeah, that looks like COVID. Madness. All of COVID. It's madness. And then they're stabilized, and we've had an uptick. And we've actually had a down. What's my date? May 4th. Hey, May 4th. May the 4th be with you. This is a little old. Yeah. There's no way they just stayed stable. But the downward decrease? I mean, like, maybe there was good news. want us to probably keep track of that. That one, that could be scary. All right. Economic and agricultural impacts on Canada. Fertilizer prices have surged. Global nitrogen fertilizers have seen significant price increases due to the train flow and production shutdowns linked to hormones disruption. Canadian farmers face higher input costs, which means you will face higher food costs. Canada producers are reporting high fertilizer costs and tighter availability as a result. Rising input costs can increase overall food production costs and feed into consumer prices. Supply chain ripple effects. As fertilizer becomes more expensive and harder to secure, farmers may have to adjust planting decisions, crop mixes, or application rates, which can influence yields in the next growing season. Even if Canada doesn't directly rely on shipments to the Strait of Hormuz, global fertilizer markets are interlinked. A disruption at a major choke point affects prices and availability worldwide. If the strait remains constrained for weeks or months, the long-term effects can ripple into agricultural input markets well beyond the Middle East. Summary snapshot. How much fertilizer does Canada get through the Strait of Hormuz? None directly. How does the disruption matter to Canada? The global disruption of fertilizer supplies, especially when delivered from the Gulf regions, are limited by Hormuz traffic issues. Tightening global markets raises fertilizer prices and can reduce availability even for countries that don't import directly. Effect on Canada farmers: higher input cost, tighter supply of key fertilizers, potential influence on planting decisions. Okay, I think I've gotten way off topic. Let's get
Every
back.
single day. Tanker traffic through the strait has collapsed. Bahrain has declared force majeure on its oil operations. Qatar, one of the world's largest LNG exporters, paused production. Oil, which was sitting at about $70 a barrel before this all started, briefly hit 100.
Have a look at our oil chart. Oh, we got a free. Not the music though. We still got music. Okay, here we go. Where is our oil price chart? Let's see how it's going. Last time I looked, it was like, oh, it's coming back down, and we're back up. I mean, it's hovering just above $100 a barrel. I mean, it's been worse over here. I mean, despite all this. Dow Jones Industrial Average. War's been going on for longer. War started, it went down. Then it rallied. Recently, it's come down a little bit. Long way from the over 50,000 and Bondi. She made that claim and then it just kept going down. Somewhere in here she had to leave. It was getting back close again. Oh, 4.9. 4.952. I don't know. Like, it's weird. Markets, I don't want to begin to predict the markets because they don't do what I think they should do. Like, at no point has the oil supply returned. So my brain tells me its line should still just continue down. But then Trump started what was it? De-escalation. He was no longer actively bombing. and it was seen as a de-escalation spiral. And see the bounce back once de-escalation started. But nothing's been solved yet. And both sides appear to be in a wait it out mentality, thinking that the other side will hurt more if they drag this out. Okay, I have no idea if I'm gonna get this or not. We're 2 minutes in.
$120 this week. Asian stock markets are in free fall.
I will interrupt
The
less.
war has now pulled in Lebanon, Hezbollah.
Asian markets in free fall. Let me see that one. Okay, I don't know what any of these stand for.
The war has now pulled in Lebanon. Hezbollah has opened a second front against Israel, and Israel has launched a ground incursion in the south. 7 American soldiers are dead, and the conflict has now touched more than a dozen countries, including...
I like that. Yeah, the big one are the rockets going into Turkey. Those are the ones that might draw Canada. I don't know why launching rockets at Turkey, but then why are they launching rockets at Saudi Arabia? Why are they launching rockets at Oman? You know, like they're not lost country. But as far as I understand, a lot of these countries have kind of, they want to see an end to the regime now. From my understanding, the UAE allowed a lot of Iran banking to go through it to avoid US sanctions. And they've stopped. And they're now largely siding with the US and preventing Iran from avoiding the sanctions. And now with the blockade, can't get ships out on there. Like, if I have to say it, Iran is going to feel the pressure before the world market. It's not going to be pleasant for the world market for fertilizer and oil, but I think Iran will collapse because of the pressure long before it does serious damage to the world market. Which means Trump's just going to wait him out.
Including Turkey, a NATO member. That's where we were on day 10. Now let's talk about what this means for us, Canadians. When it comes to Canada, we are structurally one of the most conflicted countries on Earth when it comes to Middle East. And that's not an exaggeration. It's a function of our geography, our economy, and the deep internal divisions that we've been patching over for 50 years. We produce massive amounts of oil. We also import massive amounts of oil. Those two facts produce completely opposite outcomes from the same crisis. And they map almost perfectly onto the Alberta versus everybody else fault line that defines Canadian politics.
The increase in the price of oil is an immediate boon to the province's finances. A $1 increase translates to roughly $750 million in royalty revenues.
If you live in Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Newfoundland, or you work in the energy sector anywhere in Canada, this war is, financially speaking, good news for you. Canada produces close to 5.5 barrels of oil per day. That makes us the 4th largest producer in the
In millions. Millions. In millions per day. The US produces the most. 22.8. Saudi Arabia, Russia, Canada, China. But remember, China's population's over a billion people. That's what, over 20x ours? And they produce less oil. Iran produces quite a lot. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Iraq, Really? Like a lot, because this Iraq all goes through the Strait of Hormuz. The UAE, they have a pipeline that allows them to go around, but I don't think it allows the full capacity of oil to go around, and so they're constrained. Obviously, Iran is now under a blockade. China's producing, Canada's producing, Russia's producing. Saudi Arabia, the same issue where a lot of their oil went through the Strait of Hormuz. They also have a pipeline, but not that much of their capacity can be sent through it. And then the US, 2% of the world's oil production.
The world behind the US, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. In the last decade, our oil sands, which used to be considered expensive to run, have gotten dramatically more efficient. And Canada's 5 biggest producers can now break even and still pay their dividends at prices between $40 to $43 per barrel. And given that oil just hit nearly 120 this week, that can be an extraordinary margin. When global oil prices go up, every extra dollar per barrel flows almost directly into revenues of Canadian producers. And through royalties and corporate taxes, they go into provincial and federal government coffers. If prices hold anywhere near current levels, we're talking about transformational numbers for Alberta's budget, for Canada's LNG export case, and for the very nation-building projects that we've been talking about in our recent videos right here. Here where it gets complicated, and where it affects the rest of Canada very differently. Higher oil prices are also making everyone's life more expensive. Sure, Alberta gets to offset these costs with higher revenues, but other provinces, not so much. Quebec and Atlantic Canada sit in very different positions. Quebec is a partial exception. Its electricity grid runs almost entirely on hydropower, which means that Quebec residents' heating bills and power costs are largely shielded from this oil crisis. But Quebec's cars, trucks, and supply chains still run on oil. Its refineries import the majority of their crude through pipelines that transit the United States. This oil is priced off global benchmarks, and they have no control over it. And they have no royalty revenue coming back to offset the costs. Quebec grid is protected, but the gas stations aren't. Atlantic Canada is a slightly different story. The Irving Oil Refinery in St. John, New Brunswick is Canada's largest refinery, processing over 300,000 barrels per day and accounting for 17% of the country's total refining capacity. There are no pipelines connecting it to the Western Canadian supply. Every barrel of crude arrives here by sea. Its suppliers are mixed. The US is the largest source, followed.
That's the thing, building a pipeline from one side of Canada to the other. It's almost cheaper to put it on a boat, ship it around. But if you're already on a boat shipping it around, it's easier to get it from over here. Boat and bring it this way. Rather than trying to go all the way around, just getting it Middle East and bringing it over is easier.
By Nigeria and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia alone accounted for roughly 20% of the Irving's crude imports as recently as 2023. Ontario is even more nuanced. In 2024, Ontario's refineries sourced about 86% of their crude domestically.
Really? So Ontario gets most of it domestically?
Mostly Alberta oil flowing east through the Enbridge mainline.
There are pipelines. There are a couple. I think we should be expanding on them.
So Ontario isn't importing Middle Eastern oil, but that doesn't protect Ontario consumers at the pump. And here's why. Oil is a globally priced commodity.
It doesn't protect anyone at the pump. That's the thing.
It doesn't matter that the crude came from our own country. The price at the Mississauga gas station is still sent by Brent, and Brent now is high. British Columbia is the most complicated province in this story. It produces oil and gas. It hosts the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which now gives Alberta producers access to global markets for the first time. And it's building the LNG Canada, which becomes a stronger export case every day that this war continues. On paper, BC has skin in the energy upside, but BC consumers also pay some of the highest gas prices in the country. Its refineries import US crude, and the province's own clean energy politics mean that it captures less of the oil benefit than Alberta does. And regardless of the province, the war doesn't just stop at the pump. Every trucked good, every heating bill, every air freight shipment gets more expensive when energy costs rise.
Yeah, like diesel's gonna be a problem. Jet fuel. Well, the specific things that the specific type of fuel that jets run off of, facing a massive increase. Isn't that what collapsed Spirit, from my understanding? Like Spirit Airlines. Why did Spirit Airlines collapse? Is it because of the rising jet fuel costs?
Capital Economics estimated that if crude reached $100 per barrel, it would add 0.6 to 0.7 percentage points to global inflation. And we blew
Inflation's so bad. So bad. An oil shock is by its nature inflationary.
past $100 on day 9. That might sound like a rounding error, but for the Bank of Canada, which has spent 2 years carefully managing rate cuts to give relief to mortgage holders, even a fraction of a percent of new inflationary pressure could be enough to pause or reverse the cycle. If that happens, mortgage renewals will be painful. First-time home buyers,
I mean, they're already painful.
so have been waiting for relief, will have no choice but to continue waiting. The affordability crisis that's been strangling Canadian renters and homeowners will get worse, not because of anything that we did specifically, but because of a war that we had no vote on, that started in the Persian Gulf.
And that's not all. The Strait of Hormuz is still paralyzed after Iran blasted these vessels in the shipping lane.
Let's linger on the Strait of Hormuz for a moment, because what's happening there now could be Canada's biggest opportunity. So imagine, this is a waterway about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, with a usable shipping
At the same time,
lane of just 3 kilometers in each.
yeah, the shipping lane itself is so much smaller. The water, the hulls of ships are so deep that you have to go on specific shipping lanes to get through.
Direction. Through that corridor, 20 million barrels of oil flow every single day. That's roughly 1/5 of all the petroleum consumed on the planet. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE, none of them can get their oil to market without passing through.
Well, the UAE has a pipeline that goes here. See this activity. But a lot of their pipelines, this was a big export terminal. This isn't even showing Iran, because Iran exports mostly through. Iraq was a big producer, Kuwait's a big producer, Saudi Arabia produces, Qatar, UAE. This is one of the big oil-rich places of the world.
This 3-kilometer lane that is bordered on one side by Iran. Iran has now effectively declared it closed. This event arguably creates the single strongest argument Canada has ever had for completing its own energy export infrastructure. LNG Canada, our first major liquefied natural gas export terminal on BC coast, just came online. It has the capacity for about 14 million tons per year. It's a meaningful but not enormous amount. Europe and Japan are already scrambling for alternatives to Middle Eastern gas right now. Canada has the gas. We just don't have enough terminals, pipelines, and export capacity to fully capitalize on this.
Well, that sounds like a good investment to me.
If there was ever a moment for an emergency push on Canadian energy infrastructure, not even for political reasons, but for purely economic and geopolitical reasons, right now is the moment. The demand is there, the price signal is there. The only thing missing is the will and the ability for.
If you think there's not gonna be another oil shock, you're wrong. You look at history, these things keep happening. And then everyone will be peaceful for a while. It'll level out, it'll go down, your oil prices will be stable. But eventually, there's going to be an oil shock and they're going to shoot back up. So,
For us to
expanding
build fast enough.
your own oil capacity and not being so dependent on foreign oil, I think is important, and we see this. China has gone massively into renewable solar energy. China makes the best solar panels, but even then, they're still so dependent on oil.
So what does all of that have?
There's no way right now to remove the oil dependence. Modern society requires oil to function. So you should ensure that your oil production pipeline, way of getting oil to your people, is domestic, if possible. If not domestic, then reliable.
Have to do with the fact that Canada cannot make up its mind about this war. An Angus Reid poll.
I mean, like what you said earlier, I don't see how any of those statements were contradicted.
Really
I think the leadership has largely made up their mind.
this week showed that 49% of Canadians oppose the US-Israeli strikes.
Ooh, let's see. I like this. Start. Let me move. Start. As you may have seen or heard, the United States and Israel have carried out airstrikes against Iran. Do you support or oppose these airstrikes? Strongly support. I probably end up in the support camp. Oppose, strongly oppose. Man, look at this split on that. That's wild. How long ago was this? I guess I can't see.
With only 34% in support. So the government's job is to manage a skeptical public while simultaneously trying not to anger a president who can blow up our trade deal with a tweet. Experts are calling it studied ambiguity, which is a diplomatic term for saying something different every day and hoping that no one adds it up. The brutal truth is that Carney is protecting Kuzma at the expense of a coherent foreign policy. And we can understand why.
I mean, yeah, you can understand why.
76% of our exports go to the US. When the existential trade relationship is under threat, some
Also, you really don't want Iran with a nuclear weapon. He keeps saying that because it's very true. It would be terrible if Iran got a nuclear weapon. Iran funds terrorism in many different countries. Hamas in Gaza. You have Lebanon, and you have the Houthis. Houthis are Yemen, right? Group in Lebanon. Anyway, they got like 3 main terrorist cells. And if you were to give these terrorist cells a nuclear weapon and then tell them to use it on like Israel, you could see a nuclear explosion used again on a public center, on a population center. And you really don't want that. And the fact that they have a history of funding and providing weapons to these groups, they have a history of doing this. If they have a nuclear weapon, would they follow their history? I mean, I expect they would. And we don't want that.
principles can become negotiable. And now here's the question that many don't want asked. If Canada is asked to contribute, what do we actually have?
Canada is about to spend big on defense.
We committed to reaching 2% of GDP on defense this year, and it happened just a few months ago. That's a real and significant increase. But the thing is that commitments on paper today don't really make things happen instantly tomorrow.
Yeah. Our
Less than
military
half of our naval fleet was operational as recently as 18 months ago.
Look at that submarine, like what is that?
The gap between what we say we want to do and our actual war-fighting capability has never been more publicly exposed. And our allies are watching. Here's where a much more human layer gets added to this. Canada is home to roughly 200,000 Iranian Canadians. It's one of the largest Iranian diaspora communities in the entire world. And this war is not abstract to them. When strikes began and news broke that Khamenei had been killed, some
Let's just take a look at the regime change. Mr. Peaceful President. Peaceful world equals terrorist Islamic, not a terrorist Islamic Republic regime. So these are all signs, like, in my opinion, like, that is someone who is supporting the U.S. intervention. If you want regime change, supporting the U.S. And so let's just ask, does the Canadian Iran community support the U.S. strikes in Iran? In Iran. And let's just see if we can get some data here, because going this off a couple times is not good. But we got more signs. Let's go. Here's a nuanced, evidence-based look at how the Canadian Iran community has been responding to the U.S. strikes on Iran, and the answer is not a single unified stand. Of course. Why could anything ever just stand? Mixed reactions among Iranian Canadians. Support and celebration by some in the community. In cities like Vancouver and Winnipeg, some Iranian Canadians rallied and expressed joy or relief at the U.S. and Israel strikes, seeing them as a potential blow against the Islamic Republic regime and hopefully for freedom in Iran. Some participants danced, waved flags, and described emotions like hope and happiness at what they viewed as a step towards ending decades of repression. Nick, stay silent. Let's be the voice of political prisoners. Let's not leave them alone. Iranian prisoners endangered, detained, death. Like, they execute political dissent in Iran, from my understanding. Stop executions in Iran. Free Iran. Okay, let's continue. Split or divided perspectives. Polling and reporting on Iranian and broader diaspora communities, including in North America, indicated that opinions are not monolithic. In North America, more broadly, diaspora groups are split on how to respond. Some favor continued pressure on the regime. Others argue foreign military intervention worsens Iranian suffering and harms internal reform efforts. Like, there's definitely a case there. In Iraq, when the US went in to Iraq, it pushed back like all social issues, including women's rights. And then when the US left, it pushed back all social issues, including women's rights again. Going there hurt, and leaving hurt. It did not help in any way. And so there's definitely a case for this. But at the same time, like, there's not boots on the ground. It's not the same situation. There can be good outcomes. Just how do you get them? Voices opposing or critical of the strikes. Concerns from within the broader Iranian Canadian community, affiliated groups. Some Iranian Canadians have expressed sadness, fear, or strong opposition to the bombing, the violence inflicted, especially those who emphasize civilian suffering or who see military strikes as harmful to ordinary. I mean, when they're talking about hitting energy infrastructure, that would affect ordinary Iran massively. For example, members of community organizations such as the Iran Women's Group in Montreal have spoken about feeling distressed that Iranians are caught between the regime and the bombs. Why views vary. Several factors contribute to the diversity of opinion, background and political context, people, alignment with. Bottom line. There is no single unified view among Iranian Canadians about the US strikes on it. Some support them, often on the basis that they target the Iranian regime and could hasten freedom from oppression. Others oppose or worry about them, especially because of civilian harm and the broader humanitarian impacts. Many in the broader diaspora are split or ambivalent, reflecting diverse political beliefs. To be fair, like, nowhere did you see support the regime. It's bombing the regime is good because it'll hasten freedom from oppression, or bombing puts them stuck between the regime and the bomb. There doesn't appear to be any actual support for the regime in any way. It's good because it is definitely, like, for my opinion, a terrorist regime, given how they support terrorism all around the world. There was something else I wanted to ask before I got back. No, it's gone. Maybe it'll show up again.
Again, and news broke that Khamenei had been killed, some celebrated openly in Toronto and Vancouver. They had watched their families inside Iran live under a regime that imprisoned, tortured, and executed political dissidents for decades. For that part of the community, this was a liberation. But for others, particularly those with parents and siblings still in Tehran, this week was meant watching a city that they grew up in get bombed, with over 1,000 civilians now confirmed dead, while airspace closed and phones go quiet. And then there is the Jewish Canadian community, roughly 400,000 people, making
400,000. How many were from Iran? It was smaller than that, so the Jewish community is actually bigger.
there is the Jewish Canadian
404,000.
community, roughly 400,000 people, making Canada the fourth largest Jewish
Really? Oh, look at the US. Okay, I didn't know this. There's almost as many. Okay, what Jewish population of the world? There's almost as many Jewish people in the US as there is in Israel. Like, that's crazy. I did not know that. I guess this explains a lot. Like, when I look at US politics, it seems like Israel has a very outsided impact on their political system. But if 5.7 million citizens in your country are Jewish, then, like, it makes sense. They're gonna try and support the 6 million people in Israel that are Jewish. With their politics, just like the the Iranians and Canada are split on how to react to that. But Israel largely sees this as a defensive operation for their survival, right? Or at least that's how they frame it. They're fighting terrorist groups that are surrounding them. But it's hard to judge because, you know, Canada, Alberta, ain't no terrorist groups out there. I don't exactly know what that's like. No, so that's interesting. Yeah, having such a population of Jews in your country like that. That's how they affect politics, right? How many people there are, they get a vote. They're gonna put pro-Israeli people into office. I mean, that's gonna be interesting. How pro-Israel the U.S. has been. I think that might become a ballot thing in the U.S. Whereas before, there was no way to express support against Israel. Both sides were cucked by Israel. But like, there's definitely a growing dissentiment. So I don't know how that's gonna go. We have the 4th largest, 38 times.
Jewish diaspora in the world after Israel,
Diaspora. That's
the US and France. And more than 3/4 of them are concentrated in Ontario and Quebec.
Hey, 20,000 out here in Alberta. Most of them are in Ontario.
For this community, Iran's regime is not a distant geopolitical concept. It's the entity that has funded Hezbollah, called openly for Israel's destruction for decades, and allegedly spent years pursuing a nuclear weapon program.
Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time.
They have the wherewithal to make a bomb very quickly if they wanted to do it.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from...
This guy has been in and out of the Israeli politics for so long. Like how many times did they have to find a new... I think it was 4 times they failed to make a government and had to do it again, their election again. And then he's basically had to side with a bunch of far-right parties in order to form a government.
Having the fissile material.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
Iran is gearing up to produce 25 bombs, atomic bombs a year.
Iran will be capable of producing nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
Time is running out.
When Iran's military infrastructure started getting
those were all old clips.
Dismantled, a significant part of this community felt something closer to a relief than horror. They probably don't even see it as aggression, rather finally addressing the threat that they've been talking about for years and years on end. These two groups aren't two sides of an abstract debate. All of them can be our neighbors, our colleagues, and in some cases, literal family members.
Like in Canada, but in the Middle East, it certainly doesn't seem that way. Like, they're pretty set on war. But I guess it's the it's not the people, the leadership, right? You have that regime, and honestly, like, I largely consider Benjamin Netanyahu to be a part of his own regime. Like, I don't know how his popularity is doing now, but he's definitely a very pro-war individual, and I think his sentiment has gone way down. What's Benjamin Netanyahu's current popularity rating? Like, democracy. You can actually look this stuff up, right? Recent credibility polling from the Israeli National Security Survey show that 32% of Israelis support high trust in Netanyahu, with 67% expressed low trust in him. Like, they have elections coming up, and it's not looking good for him. Like, he might try and be like, "Oh, we're in a war. We can't have election." But there's a good possibility we'll see a different leader of Israel. Hopefully not such a warmonger, but Netanyahu's popularity / approval is low to modest, with roughly 1/3 of the public expressing strong confidence and a majority expressing low to dissatisfaction. Not uncommon in war times, but still politically challenging. When is Israel's next election? Israel's next election for the Knesset is scheduled to be held 27th of October. Oh, so we got something in October. We got 2 things in November. It's gonna be a busy end of the year. Try and get through
All of
this.
them can be our neighbors, our colleagues, and in some cases, literal family members, watching the exact same war and feeling potentially even completely opposite things about it. And the tension lives right here in Canada, in the same cities and the same ridings, and the same voter base that our government will want to keep happy. Now, here's the thing. This conflict doesn't begin and end with Israel and Iran. In retaliation, Iran launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at US military bases in Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. It struck civilian infrastructure across the region. As of this week, Iran has fired counterstrikes in more than a dozen nations. One decision, made by 2 leaders, has suddenly brought military action to the entire Middle East region. Was the rest of the region even consulted before the attack? Some commentary from officials indicate that they weren't. Trump and Netanyahu...
From my understanding, Trump saw an opportunity to take out the leader and just went for it. Their plans for a protracted war were not that far yet. The opportunity presented itself. He took it.
who deliberately disguised the timing of the attack, because they were afraid that word would get out and Iran's supreme leader would go into hiding before the strike could be executed. The result is a handful of the Middle Eastern countries that host US military bases and have spent years building.
These all host military bases? Like Iraq has a military base? The US military? I don't think so. Does Iraq have a US military base? Like, didn't they leave Iraq after? Oh my goodness, they do. Yes, the United States currently has a military presence in Iraq. The situation is different today than it was a decade ago. U.S. forces are not maintaining the large network of permanent bases that existed during the immediately after the 2003-2011 Iraq War. But there are still U.S. troops and facilities present under specific agreements with the Iraqi government. They have troops there still. Currently, the U.S. presence in Iraq presence is reduced but still real. U.S. troops remain in selected locations. Why there's still a U.S. presence. Even with the drawdown, the U.S. military footprint in Iraq has drawn renewed attention as tensions in the Middle East have escalated, and Iraqi soil has again being a front for regional putting attacks on U.S. facilities and personnel by militias. No, the U.S. does not maintain an extensive. Okay, but yes, they still have a military personnel and facilities. Okay.
Relationships with Washington.
So they have bases all of here. It's almost like they knew this oil producing region was going to be the source of conflict, and so they just put bases everywhere.
Woke up on
Iran
March
did
1st
not
to
play
find themselves
ball.
in a war that they didn't even sign up for, with no time to evacuate civilians or prepare their defenses.
Yeah, from what I've heard, like a lot of these places like Qatar travel more than they depend also on like they were seen as like good places to vacation. Like, depended on a certain amount of foreign income through vacation and stuff like that, and like the UAE and Qatar specifically, and that is like disappeared because as soon as a bomb drops, your vacation plans change. You were gonna go to the UAE for a vacation, you're not going anymore. You're just gonna go to somewhere in Europe, or maybe Japan. The yen's taking a beating. Money goes a little further there now.
US military bases and have spent years building relationships with Washington woke up on March 1st to find themselves in a war that they didn't even sign up for, with no time to evacuate civilians or prepare their defenses. Why does that matter for Canada specifically? Well, because we're not just a bystander in this region. We are, as of literally a few months ago, an active investor in it, and it was part of our big diversify away from the US strategy, which is now literally going up in fireworks. In November 2025, Carney flew to Abu Dhabi for the first visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to the UAE in over 40 years. He came back with a signed Foreign Investment Protection Agreement, the launch of full free trade negotiations, and, most significantly, a commitment from the UAE to invest $50 billion in Canada. That agreement would be targeting LNG, critical minerals, ports, and AI infrastructure. That handshake was cornerstone of Canada's entire trade diversification strategy away from the US. Just 6 weeks ago, Canada's trade minister was in Qatar trying to advance...
I mean, to be fair, it's not their... That's bad.
negotiations and open up new market access agreements. Qatar, which preemptively paused LNG production after being hit with over 100 missiles and 50 drones, is the same Qatar that Canada removed visa requirements for in November 2025 to accelerate business travel and commercial ties. Now, how can this war affect our day-to-day lives in the most tangible ways? Let's begin with one variable that changes almost every outcome that we might think about: how long this war lasts.
Oh, we got no idea. As I've said a couple times, both sides appear to be in a wait-and-see mentality right now. And that's just... how long does it take for Iran's regime to collapse? I mean, no idea.
A ceasefire in the next week or two looks...
bombs didn't make it collapse. How is a blockade? Like, is this going to be more effective?
completely different from a conflict that drags into the summer. If you look into Canada's energy sector, Alberta, Saskatchewan, offshore Newfoundland, or anywhere in the energy supply chain, a short war means producers will make more profits, royalties will flow, and things then normalize. A more prolonged conflict will structurally reprice Canadian oil.
Higher prices, LNG. Like you'll see higher prices in everything.
And make the LNG export case so undeniable that it will force the infrastructure investment conversation that we've been deferring for 20 years. And either way, the near-term outlook will have improved. But only the second scenario is truly transformational for Canada. If you are a renter, a first-time homebuyer, or coming up on a mortgage renewal, the Bank of Canada was already in a deliberate hold at 2.25% before this thing started. The next rate announcement is next week, and a brief conflict probably doesn't change the path much, but a prolonged one will most likely do it. Because sustained oil-driven inflation won't just delay the rate relief, it might actually create conditions for a rate hike.
Have they changed that? Canadian interest rate are 5 years, 10 years. Really? It was really low back. So we had COVID, brought it way down. After COVID, inflation was out of control, so they just kept stepping it up. So they got inflation under control. Then they were able to bring it back down a bit. Brought it down, and it looks like they've been pretty consistent. A wait and see mentality.
If you're in manufacturing, logistics, trucking, or any business that moves things, a short war means a painful few weeks of fuel surcharges.
Yep.
A long conflict will mean that your cost structure will have changed for a while. If you have investments, markets right now are pricing in a short scenario. That's why energy stocks have moved, but broader indices haven't really collapsed. If the Strait of Hormuz stays effectively closed for weeks at a time rather than days, which is where it's trending on day 10, you're looking at a repricing across all sectors, not just energy. We've laid out a lot in this video. What ties all of it together is a single and uncomfortable truth that this crisis exposes Canada's contradictions the country has done nothing about for decades. We produce oil and we import oil. We need American goodwill and NATO credibility at the same time. We've just made investment partnerships in a region that's now getting bombed without warning. Every other country gets to pick a lane. Canada has to navigate all of them at once, and right now we're doing it without a coherent foreign policy position. We have an under-equipped military, and our energy infrastructure is just not fully there. The long-term answer for us is the one that we already know. Open up the LNG Phase 1 capacities to the full, and move the Phase 2 expansion along. Build the East Coast export capacity that has never existed. Complete the East-West pipeline connection so that central Canadian refineries can actually run on Canadian oil instead of imported crude. And finally, stop being a country where one province's success is another province's heating bill. The Iran war didn't create any of this. It just made the cost of deferring these issues impossible to ignore for Canada. If you want to go deeper on the energy infrastructure case, the defense spending story, or how Canada navigates a rupturing world order, those are all the videos that we've made. And let me know in the comments, do you think Canada's position on this war is the right one? And if not, what should it be? Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you tap the like button below, share it with your friends, and make sure you subscribe.
That was good. I like that. Canada's position on the war, huh? I mean, Carney basically said it in the beginning, right? The only thing I would change, like, I don't know. The war's so cold.
Canada has changed this position on the Iran war 4 times in 10 days. Day 1.
Canada supports the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace.
Day 4.
These actions are inconsistent with international law.
Day 5.
One can never categorically rule out participation. We will stand by our allies.
Day
Like, I like all 3 of those.
10.
Le Canada ne participe pas dans les opérations
That's just a statement.
offensives des États-Unis et Israël et ne
The
y
never will,
participe.
like, it kind of depends on what happened. The whole never say never thing, like, There had to be a better way than war to do this. Like, I see the problem. I don't know if war was the solution. Honestly, like, focusing on the Ukraine conflict, like, and providing support there. I got no. Let's see. Does anyone have a good take in the comments? Come on. Desperate for a good take. Whatever the case, Canada needs to work on itself and not be involved in things over its head unless it's supported, aid, and rebuilding. I mean, pretty much. Work on improvement. Pipeline expenditure is a good one. Refining locally would be good. I also really like the idea of being able to do nuclear enrichment in Canada. There's a lot of like nuclear power advancements that are happening, and having like a local nuclear enrichment capacity would allow us to have better nuclear energy within our own. I think that's something we should be looking into. Keeps changing and it's chaotic in general. Canada should not get involved with economic suicide mission in the Middle East. That person is very, very determined. There are so many factors at play. Like, a nuclear Iran would be devastating. Were they trying to get a nuclear weapon? They had 60% enrichment. You do that for one reason.